All right. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a good day. Um, Bright and early, for me at least. But hopefully you're at a more reasonable time listening to this. Um, this is the last recording for Wolf. Yeah, up to this point, she's talked about meaning being the most important aspect of, I guess, the pursuit of what we call the good life. It is meaning in life that really determines whether a life is good or not. She's outlined that meaning is derived from doing things we love, but that this needs to be the right kind of love. And so uh, Wolf sort of expands on this idea by saying that uh, it is meaning is derived from positively uh, interacting with pursuits or people that we love and are worthy of our love. Okay. Um, yeah, she then moves on to talking about why it has to be worthy of our love, so sort of from the external sense, and why these two things actually need to coexist in the one like pursuit. It's not enough that I love one thing and then um, you know, uh, I work on something else that is worthy of love, but that those two things don't actually exist in the same thing at the same time. Uh, yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. But what we're going to be looking at now is the final part of her reading, the fitting fulfillment view. So she's going to be arguing here that um, well, not really arguing a whole lot of anything. She's going to be outlining again her view that to seek meaning, we have to get fulfillment from things, which means we follow our passions, and that those passions are valuable outside of ourselves. Uh, she's going to be discussing that a little bit. This is sort of a section where she summarizes the rest of her argument a little bit, as well as sort of bringing up a few other things. So what we're going to be doing is, yeah, going through the reading. Sorry, I am very tired. It's 5:22 a.m. Um, so uh, let's get started. Let's get stuck into some wolf. Um, so she starts off really with just a bit of a review of what's come before it. So a nice little summary for you if you are sort of wanting to review notes or whatever. Um, she gives you a little bit of that now. So, uh, so the fitting fulfillment view defended. I earlier argued that the suggestion that a life is meaningful insofar as it contributes to something larger than itself is most charitably understood if we take it not as an isolated objective criterion. Rather, we should see it as a criterion that functions in tandem, or at the same time, with an expectation about the subjective feelings and attitudes and contributing to something larger that contributing to something larger will engender. So Wolf is saying, yes, you must contribute to something larger than yourself, but this has to happen in like association with, or in tandem, in her words, um, with something, a certain feeling or attitude towards that. In other words, you need to love it as well. Analogously, uh, the suggestion that a life is meaningful insofar as one finds one's passion and goes for it, thereby being fulfilled, is best understood as a subjective criterion meant to function not in isolation, but rather in conjunction with the assumption that the objects of one's passion will fall within a certain objective range. So again, sort of flipping this, once we've identified things that we love, then this needs to exist in conjunction with things that are valuable also outside ourselves. Okay. The conception of meaningfulness that I proposed at the beginning of this lecture brings these new criterion together. The conception, you will remember, claimed that meaningfulness in life came from loving something or a number of things worthy of love and being able to engage with it or them in some positive way. Um, so this is, sort of the core definition of what meaningfulness is according to Wolf. Um, so yeah, if you haven't got that one written down, I certainly would. Uh, as I've put it on other occasions, meaning in life consists in and arises from actively engaging in projects of worth. Um, on this conception, meaning in life arises when subjective attraction meets objective attractiveness, and one is able to do something about it or with it. So this is sort of the more technical breakdown of it. So, what does her earlier definition, what is it really saying? Well, that there's two elements to developing meaning, a subjective element and an objective element. These two things must both be present for a pursuit to be worthy of pursuit. And uh, that we then need to, as it says there, do something about it or with it. So interact with this thing positively. The popular view that takes meaningfulness to consist in finding one's passion and pursuing it can be taken as a way to emphasize the role that love or subjective attraction plays in meaning. The equally familiar view that associates meaning with a contribution to or involvement with something larger than oneself can be understood as emphasizing the role of objective value or worth. So, again, the sort of colloquial or the common view of um, pursuing your passion, this is the subjective side, and the view that we need to contribute to something larger or greater or other than ourselves. This is the objective argument. Um, the endoxic method, which we've discussed, the argument based on what is commonly held or held by those who are knowledgeable. The endoxic method thus supports the conception of meaningfulness I propose here. It supports the view that when people talk about meaningfulness, they often have roughly the thing I have identified in mind. It supports the idea that the feature I have identified is, at some level, recognized as desirable, that it is thought, or perhaps better felt, to answer to a certain kind of human need. The question remains, however, why such a feature should be thought or felt desirable. So what Wolf is saying here is, according to the endoxic method, this fits with what we think meaning in life is all about. Okay, this works with that commonly held view. Okay, so using the endoxic method, it seems to be justified. What that doesn't answer is why we have that sense. Like, why is it that we think that meaning is derived from either pursuing our passions or other people would say by contributing to something other than ourselves? Wolf would say it has to be both of these. Why do we feel like these are important to us? Okay, this is sort of where the conversation is going to be moving now. What, if anything, is so good, so distinctively good about loving objects worthy of love and being able to actively engage with them in a positive way? An advantage of my conception of meaning, in addition to its being supported by the endoxic method, is that it identifies a feature that yields an intelligible and plausible answer to this question. So Wolf is arguing that we don't have an answer to this question of why we feel this life is desirable. So she's saying her argument for meaning in life is supported by the commonly held views about meaning in life. Okay, this is the endoxic method that she's talked about. What it's yet to do is explain why we hold that view? Like, why is it that we feel that that life is desirable? Okay, we do, and her view is supported by the endoxic method. But why do we support it? Well, now, why do we feel that? Now she's going to be explaining how she thinks her view, the fitting fulfillment view, um, also helps us to understand why we feel this way about things. Okay, not just that we do, but why we do. Okay, uh, so we've already noted that being able to actively engage with things that one loves, being able, in other words, to indulge one's passions, affords a particularly rewarding type of subjective experience. It is, if you will, a high quality pleasure. Like the fulfillment view, the fitting fulfillment view, for lack of a better name, identifies a feature that gives this recognizable benefit to the person whose life possesses it. According to the latter view, however, what is distinctively valuable is not the state or ongoing experience of fulfillment considered in itself. Rather, what is valuable is that one's life be actively and lovingly engaged in projects that give rise to this feeling, when the projects in question can be seen to have a certain kind of objective worth. It is not enough, on this view, that one is occupied with doing things that one loves. The things one loves doing must be good in some independent way. Why should this be something that matters? Why should this be something that matters to us? If having this in one's life answers a human need, what human need is it? So, this little paragraph here is kind of the intro to the next part, really. Wolf is talking about, okay, well, we know that there's a certain feeling that arises from pursuing our passion um, when that passion is worthy of being pursued. But why? Why is it that we get this? And why is it different to other things? Why is it different to other forms of, good feeling like pleasure or happiness? Okay. Um, so, continuing on, at least part of the answer, I believe, has to do with a need or at least an interest or concern to see one's life as valuable in a way that can be recognized from a point of view other than one's own. So, what Wolf is saying here is we need to live a life that others can also identify as being valuable. Okay, there's something in us that uh, sort of wants to be recognized, not necessarily like rewarded or praised, but there's something in us that wants our life to be a life where if other people observe it, they would see it as being valuable. Okay. Um, so, uh, So yeah, continuing on. We can better understand this need and perhaps quell the doubts of those who are skeptical of its existence if we see its connection with other features of human psychology with which we are familiar from other contexts. One such feature that has long been of interest to philosophers has been especially emphasized by Thomas Nagel, the one and only, the Batman, if you remember from earlier in the year. Not referencing the same text, unfortunately, one of his other texts, but the one and only Batman. Uh, so yeah, she's once again referencing another philosopher here. She's referencing Thomas Nagel, namely the human capacity, indeed the tendency to see or try to see oneself from an external point of view. So Nagel argues that humans have the ability, but also um, quite often we fall into the habit of seeing ourselves um, from an external perspective. So looking at ourselves kind of from the outside, if that makes sense. Um, so yeah, that's Nagel's perspective there. Um, Sorry, I lost my page. I lost where I was up to, rather. Humans have a tendency to aspire to see things, including themselves, without bias, to observe their lives from a detached perspective. They aspire to a kind of objectivity. Nagel has characterized this as an aspiration to take a view from nowhere. Uh, Others have talked about this feature in terms of a God's eye point of view. So it's interesting, that we get this link to, some sort of religious belief because, uh, whether you are religious or not, I think this helps to conceptualize what uh, Wolf is talking about here. So we've got a tendency to, and if we think about religious traditions, so many of them are focused on the idea of living a life that God approves of. Okay, so, if you're part of the Abrahamic traditions, the Judaism, Christianity, Islam, uh, all of these have a tendency to view uh, our behavior from an external perspective. It's not enough that we can justify our behavior, but an external God must also endorse our behavior. Well, what Nagel's sort of saying here is, well, this is probably um, to do with this human ability and, in fact, tendency to want to see things from outside of our own personal perspective. Um, and what Wolf is saying is this translates to having meaning in life. It's not enough that we view our meaning as important. Um, we also want our meaning to be viewed by others to be important. Okay, so this is a big difference that she's talking about here. Okay, this is why we seek the objective view. Um, in addition, humans have a need to think well of themselves, a need for self-esteem. If one is prone to imagine oneself from an external point of view, to see oneself as if from without, the wish quite naturally follows that from that point of view, one will be able to see oneself and one's life as good, valuable, and a right source of pride. So, extending from this need, from this, this tendency to uh, try and view the quality of our lives from a third party point of view, this God's eye point of view. Extending from that is then also the, you know, relatively obvious perspective that, well, if we're doing that, it's we probably want to be viewed positively. So it's not enough to say, well, yes, I'm being viewed. I don't care whether people see me as good or bad. I don't care if God sees me or if I'm viewed externally as being good or bad. I just want to be viewed externally. Well, no, no, no. This is not um, how we commonly think. Uh, you know, the whole idea of looking at ourselves from the outside is that hopefully we'll like what we see. Um, and not just from our own perspective, but from a universal perspective. That we'll be able to, you know, uh, take pride and build our self-esteem based on the fact that our life is sort of necessarily good, not just subjectively good. Um, so yeah, I hope that makes sense. Still, the strength of that wish and the particularly poignant feelings that can accompany it seem to me to involve something further that I suggest is related to our social natures and to our need or wish not to be alone. So, um, Wolf is saying here that she feels like her view endorses the human tendency to try and view our lives from the outside. Well, the fitting fulfillment view ticks that box by placing importance on the idea that what you do has objective value, not just subjective value, um, and that it sort of fits with the idea that, well, we are sort of beasts that require our ego to be stroked a little bit. Um, we need self-esteem uh, in order to sort of identify with having a good life. We need to feel good about our lives, and this is one of the ways that we do it. That idea that, well, yes, we can feel good about our lives because they are valuable, and not just valuable from our own perspective, but valuable from a perspective outside of ourselves. Um, what Wolf is going to talk about now is that there's also sort of a social nature to humanity that, uh, again, further supports, or well, that the fitting fulfillment view um, is in line with, and that hence uh, sort of further supports the validity of the fitting fulfillment view. Um, all right. Whew. Contemplation of one's mortality or of one's cosmic insignificance can call up the sort of feelings I have in mind. Uh, the thought that one's life is like a bubble that, upon bursting, will vanish without a trace can lead some people to despair. The thought that one lives in an indifferent universe makes some people shudder. So what Wolf is sort of talking about here is kind of being aware of how fleeting our existence is, how short it is, and also how little impact it has, how sort of uneventful our life is. A lot of the times when people begin to think about this, they can despair, they can feel bad. No one likes the idea that they're not important, but from a cosmic point of view, we really aren't. The impact that we have as an individual, at least, is minimal at best, if measurable at all. So this can kind of lead to this almost like dread in humans, because we're so aware of the way that we live, and by extension, we want to lead a life that we see as being good. Um, this is sort of saying it doesn't really matter. Uh, and so that can sort of take the wind out of your sails a little bit. What Wolf is saying is that the fitting fulfillment view can help to deal with that, help to sort of counteract that dread that comes from that idea. Uh, Reminding oneself of the fact, if it is a fact, that one is actively and, we may stipulate, somewhat successfully engaging in projects of independent worth may put these feelings to rest. By living in a way that is partly occupied by and directed towards the preservation or promotion or creation of value that has its source outside of oneself, one does something that can be understood, admitted, or appreciated from others' points of view, including the imaginary point of view of an impartial, indifferent observer. The fact that the feature focused on by the fitting fulfillment view can have bearing uh, on, sorry, the fact that the feature focused on by the fitting fulfillment view can have bearing on our reactions to thoughts about the human condition, that it can even offer some solace to those who are disinterested when they think distressed, not disinterested, distressed when they think about our insignificance, gives some support to the idea that this feature is reasonably identified with meaningfulness, since it makes the association between meaningful and the age-old philosophical topic of meaning in life more than a coincidence. So again, Wolf is sort of saying, humans, we can all fall prey to this idea that we are somewhat insignificant in our lives, that from a cosmic perspective, we really make no difference. This can be quite, upsetting, for lack of a better word. But what Wolf is also saying is that, well, whilst it can be upsetting, um, the fitting fulfillment view allows us to understand that we can lead a good life still, whilst our impact may be quite small, if, as I said before, if measurable at all. Um, if there is an impact, it will be a good one. And there's some sort of solace to take from that. There's some, positivity that we can take from that view that, well, perhaps my life might not have a great impact on the world, but you know what? If it does, I'm going to make sure that impact is a positive one. It can help to get through that dread of realizing our insignificance. A longing for fulfillment and an admiration for lives engaged in projects that are fitting for fulfillment are not restricted to times when we are especially cognizant of the human condition, however. So we shouldn't just be doing these at times where we do feel that real dread about our insignificance. Even when we are not thinking about our relation to the cosmos, we may intelligibly, want to do something whose value extends beyond its value for us. Indeed, if we never explicitly formulate a desire that our lives be connected to something of independent value, the unarticulated sense that we are so connected may affect the quality of our experience. So what Wolf is saying is that, like, if you don't acknowledge the importance of the objective perspective of meaning, that meaning has to be meaningful to others, not just you, there's a good chance that if you pursue a life of, pursuing your passion with no regard for whether it is objectively valuable or desirable, there'll probably be this sort of niggle in your head. There'll be, to borrow a phrase, there'll be this splinter in your mind driving you mad. There will be this sense that your passion is not doing everything that it should. The feeling of being occupied with something of independent value, the engagement in an activity that takes one out of oneself, if it seems to me, can be thrilling. Why? So this idea of being, completely dedicated to something. On the screen, I've got, the example of being in the zone. This can be a really, really, really positive feeling, but it's not an egotistical feeling from the point of view, well, you kind of feel like you're outside yourself. That you've escaped your conscious mind for a bit and you're kind of free. But why? Why do we find this experience to be a positive one? At least part of the reason, again, seems to be related to our social natures, and our desire not to be alone. If we are engaged in projects of independent value, fighting injustice, preserving a historic building, writing a poem, then presumably others will be able to appreciate what we are doing too. So, in class, I've talked about the idea of there's almost like a legacy argument that Wolf is making here, that leaving something of objective value, so something that is valuable even without our perspective being present, so after our passing, this is important. This implies that even more, I think, that others be able to look at what we do and appreciate it and understand the value of it. Others may actually appreciate what we are doing, or they may at least appreciate the same values as the ones that motivate us. This makes us, at least notionally, part of a community, sharing values to some degree and and a point of view, even when no one knows what we are doing or when no one appreciates it. However, the thought that it is worth doing can be important to us. So sort of as I said before, it can give us some satisfaction knowing that what we're doing is good for others as well, not just good for ourselves. Even when no one knows what we are doing or when no one appreciates it, however, the thought that it is worth doing can be important to us. So, I'm sure we've all we can all associate the idea of projects that we feel like are very important, but other people seem to malign. Um, that confidence that what we are doing really is important, that it will help other people, that can usually be enough to sort of get us through these sorts of feelings. Um, uh, the scorned artist or lonely inventor, the scientist whose research no one seems to approve, may be sustained by the thought that her work is good and that the day may come when others will understand and value it. So, yeah, Einstein's a good example of this. The idea that, um, uh, you know, well, his work was, scorned and rejected by the scientific community initially. Um, but then later, he was sort of accepted into the scientific community with open arms because the work proved fruitful. It proved to be correct. And so it is this idea that, like, even if that recognition isn't happening, the idea that no, what I'm doing is important and what I'm doing really matters, is still something that, should sort of keep us going. It should have a positive impact on us. Although I have suggested, that the desirability of living in a positive relation with something that the value of which does not depend solely on ourselves is related to our sociability. Uh, these last examples show that the relation may be indirect, perhaps even metaphorical. People who, for any number of reasons, cannot or do not wish to live around or be in intimate contact with other people may still live meaningful and fulfilling lives. So if you are isolated, as Nietzsche would say, if you're living a life of solitude, um, sorry, excuse me, if you're living a life of solitude, or you're isolated, whether that be by your own design or be by society. So, for example, think of a prisoner who's been placed in isolation for years on end. This does not mean that you can't still do what Wolf is talking about here. It doesn't mean that you can't, um, get value out of the idea that what you are doing matters to other people. you know. Um, Obviously, you need to be pursuing something in this case. You can't just be sitting around, uh, not doing anything. There must be some sort of pursuit, but that pursuit can be enough to get you through that solitude. Um, some artists, for example, may make art for an only dimly conceived posterity. Conversely, for some people, the support, approval, and admiration of their contemporaries is not enough to make them feel, uh, sorry, to make them feel fulfilled by what they are doing or to judge their own lives as meaningful. It may be suspected that the interests I am discussing are bourgeois interests. Love that word, bourgeois. Uh, commonly of concern only to persons from a certain place, time, and social class. Perhaps it will be thought that these concerns are confined to a class that is narrower still, namely to those who are excessively intellectual or unusually reflective. So what Wolf is talking about here is, uh, yeah, there is the criticism, perhaps quite rightly so, that this everything she's talking about is not the concern of sort of the common person. Um, these are the concerns of, the philosopher who overthinks things and, is desperately searching for complexity in what is actually quite simple and, overly intelligent and, that sort of idea. Um, uh, And the example she's about to give, which I think is the best one, is, well, maybe these are only concerns for the very wealthy in the world. It's highly unlikely that if you live in, if you're living in war-torn Syria at the moment, your, apartment block has just been blown up. Uh, you're probably not sitting there thinking about whether your life is subjectively and objectively valued. You, there's a certain, arrogance to the argument that, this is an important question and we must take time to think about it. And Wolf is directly dealing with that. She's not shirking that. But yeah, we'll continue on. If one has to struggle to get enough to eat for oneself and one's family, to get shelter from the cold, to fight a painful disease, concern over whether one is engaged in projects of independent worth may seem a luxury. So this is what I was talking about before. The fact that an interest in a meaningful life may not surface until one's more basic needs are met is no reason to dismiss its importance, however. So Wolf does say that, well, that might be the case. Maybe this is only a question for people who are very privileged and live a certain type of life. One of safety and security, one where they don't have to think about putting food on the table, one where those sorts of concerns are kind of taken care of. But even if that's the case, well, fine. But once those things are in place, it is an important question to think about. It doesn't mean that this question is not important. It means that the question only kicks in after a certain point. Um, but the question still needs to be asked. We still need to be reflecting on what makes our life meaningful. And yes, that meaning might only be able to be derived after a certain kind of what we might call developmental point in terms of wealth. Um, uh, but that doesn't mean it's not important for anyone who has gotten to that point. Um, Nor does it seem to me that the fact that a person does not consciously articulate an interest in ensuring that some of the projects or things with which his life is bound up can be judged to have independent worth is enough to warrant the view. Sorry, to warrant the view that whether they have such worth is irrelevant to him. Bernard Williams once wrote, with respect to the question of life's being desirable, that it gets by far uh, it gets by far its best answer in never being asked at all. So what Wolf is saying is, you know, it's quite likely that a lot of people will never even think about whether their life has objective meaning. It will just never pop up on their radar. This doesn't mean that their life doesn't have objective meaning, and it doesn't mean that if they are living a life that is objectively valuable, that this doesn't add something to their life, that this isn't important. It just means that they never bothered to ask the question, but they got the right answer to it, if that makes sense. Okay. So yeah, and once again, referencing another philosopher, Bernard Williams, who sort of said the same thing. Uh, when we're talking about what is desirable in life, perhaps the best way to deal with that crucial question is not to ask it, to focus on living our lives, and focus on doing the right thing. Perhaps that is the best way. Um, Similarly, I think for a person whose life is meaningful, the need to think about it might never come up. If a person is actively engaged in valuable projects, he may be getting feedback from these projects that enhances his life, even if he is unaware of it. So we don't need to actively think about this sort of stuff. If we're kind of doing it right, for lack of a better term, we will just feel good about it. We'll still get that good feeling, even though we don't necessarily take the time to think about uh, the life we're living. Our interest in being able to see our lives as worthwhile from some point of view, external to ourselves, and our interest in being able to see ourselves as part of an at least notional community that can understand us and that to some degree shares our point of view, then seems to me to be pervasive, if not even universal. So it seems like these views are held by basically everyone. By engaging in projects of independent value, by protecting, preserving, creating, and realizing value, the source of which lies outside of ourselves, we can satisfy these interests. Indeed, it is hard to see how we could satisfy them in any other way. All right, last little bit here. We're going to get a bit of a sum up from Wolf. Here we go. Last part. Reflecting on the pervasiveness, so how common of these interests, and on the way a life of fitting fulfillment answers to them, will, I hope, support both my proposal that meaningfulness is a matter of active and loving engagement in projects of worth, and my claim that this feature, distinct from both happiness and morality, deserves to be included in a conception of a fully successful human life. So Wolf is really summarizing what she hopes she's achieved in this last section. Okay, that she's been able to show that her view kind of ticks the boxes that she said need to be ticked. For much of this lecture, I have stressed the subjective aspect of a meaningful life. That is, the aspect that assures a meaningful life of being fulfilled, and to that extent, feeding good. The emphasis brought out feeling good, not feeding good, feeling good. This emphasis brought out what my view of meaningfulness has in common with the more popular fulfillment view, the view that says one should find one's passion and go for it, and allowed me easily to demonstrate one way in which a meaningful life was good for the person who lives it. When we consider what deep human interests or needs a meaningful life distinctively answers to, however, the objective aspect of such a life needs to be stressed. So, whilst pursuing your passion is good, okay, whilst pursuing your passion might be enjoyable, might feel very fulfilling, if we're talking about like really ticking the boxes of what we desire, then we need to do more than just feel fulfilled. We really need to have a perspective of the item that we are pursuing. So what we are trying to fulfill, we really need to have a sense that it is worthy of that dedication. Our interest in living a meaningful life is not an interest in a life feeling a certain way, but rather an interest that it be a certain way. Specifically, that it be one that can be appropriately appreciated, admired, or valued by others. So this is an important point here. What Wolf is saying is when we say we want a meaningful life, we're not actually expressing that we want our life to have a certain feeling, so much as we're expressing that we want our life to be a certain way. So it's not the subjective experience of the life that we're talking about, it's the objective reality of it, for our life to be a certain way. Okay. Valued by others, that it be a life that contributes to or realizes or connects to some positive, in some positive way, with independent value, so a value outside ourselves. We do not satisfy those interests simply by thinking or feeling that they are satisfied, any more than we can satisfy our interests in not being alone by thinking or feeling that we are not alone. To have a life that not only seems meaningful, but is meaningful, the objective aspect is as important as the subjective. Okay, important last little line there. To have a life that not only seems meaningful, this is the subjective point of view, it feels meaningful to me, but is meaningful, this is the objective view. The objective aspect is as important as the subjective. Okay. Many questions about this conception of meaningfulness and its importance remain, however. In particular, I have not yet addressed or even so much as acknowledged the resistance many readers are no doubt feeling towards my references to objective value. or to the corresponding view that some activities or projects are more fitting than others to be the object of one's life's central passion. So basically, Wolf here is talking about questions that have not been fully answered yet. This is quite common with philosophy, where the authors will say, okay, well, this is what still needs to be worked on, and this is what I'm going to focus on next. Very, very common thing we see. And what Wolf is saying here is, well, no doubt there's plenty of people who feel like I haven't really dealt with one of the core questions, or one of the core problems, in that I seem to be judging other people's lives as either worthy or not, and kind of what gives me the right, or what makes my perspective on that correct. If I'm going to say that you're wasting your life playing video games, then sort of what authority do I have to say that? What gives me, special power to be able to judge one person's life as being valuable? She's sort of saying this might still be a niggling issue that people have. I shall begin the next lecture by responding to these concerns. Let me warn you in advance, though, that I shall not be offering a theory of objective value, much less a foolproof procedure for determining which things have it. In light of this, one might reasonably wonder why I bother to bring up the subject at all. The remainder of the second lecture will be aimed at answering the question. By the end of the second lecture, then, I shall have tried to convince you not only of what meaning is, but also of why it matters. Okay, for the next chapter of Wolf, go and buy a book. You can find out, what meaning is, and also why it matters. All right, so that was a long one. Sorry, but that last section is a big one. Hopefully you've stuck around this long, and hopefully you've enjoyed the course. Obviously these recordings are covering the VCE required readings for philosophy. So what I wanted to do is just take a moment, and to anyone who's in my class this year, this is the class of 2019. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you very much for choosing to study philosophy. I really hope that it's been meaningful to you, to use Wolf's words. I love teaching philosophy. I really, really do. I think it's very, very important, and I think that a lot of people in our society are much poorer for having never studied it. So I hope you feel like it's brought some sort of benefit to your life. For what it's worth, your choice to study philosophy this year has certainly brought a lot of benefit to my life. I really love thinking about this stuff. I love talking about it. I love teaching it. So, from me to you, thank you very much for the choice you made to study it. It has definitely had a very positive impact on my life, and I really appreciate that choice that you made. I hope that you've got something out of it too. Look, the great thing about philosophy is it never ends. If you've got questions, if you are ever discussing anything of real value, well, then you're doing philosophy. And whilst a lot of people see it as something of like a pointless venture, I disagree. I don't think there can be anything more meaningful than taking some time to reflect on our lives, thinking about the way that we live them, thinking about what's important to us, and then attempting to pursue the best possible life we can, which is really the core question of philosophy. So from me to you, particularly my class of 2019, but really to anyone who's listening to this, I know based on the subscriptions, there's a hell of a lot more people than just the people I teach. Thank you very much for studying philosophy, and I hope you feel like you're better for it. I certainly feel like I'm better for having the opportunity to teach it. Okay, until next time, I'll see you later. Good luck.